Hello, and this is Games with Fang, and welcome to part 4.2 of the Cozy Exploration tutorial series. And in this tutorial, we'll be making the conversation system. And let me just open up the list of things that we'll be covering. So the first thing is that we'll be integrating the UI into the dialogue system. There's a small change in the UI which we'll be getting into in just a moment. We'll make the conversation UI dynamic, and it will automatically size based on the dialogues. And we'll also make the Cinemachine camera zoom in a little bit, because that happens in the reference game as well. We'll not be covering these parts, which is basically the text effects, where you can see that there's a typewriter effect in the game, and that's being done through a shader, which I'll not be covering. And we'll also not be covering this swap sprite, which is basically, let's say this is our conversation box and this is our player, and if there's an NPC over here in the game, it would swap the sprite. We won't be covering that part because that's too much into the details. So that being said, we are ready to dive in, except there's a small change in the UI. So currently the UI that I imported looks like this. If I open the sprite editor, you can see that the borders are proper on this side, but because of this extrusion, it needs to be a little bit to the left, which I don't seem to like, because it gets in the way when we are making the conversation. So once I have the sprite exported into my project, I can just select that and change the sprite mode to multiple and go into the sprite editor. And now I'm gonna draw one square around the first box, and I'm gonna draw the second box around this one, and this will be the tail, or like the extrusion part of it, which we'll be using in a moment. So I have my canvas selected, and if I right click and go to UI and create an image, I'm gonna drag the first sprite into that, and I'm gonna go to the scene view, and in the sprite editor I'm gonna draw the borders around this one. So I'm gonna draw around 100, and the same goes for the top and bottom, and I'm gonna hit apply. Let me just reassign the sprite here. So if I expand the box, you can see that it no longer has that stretchy effect that it had. So I'm gonna quickly change this pixels per unit to maybe like 300, and you can see that the edges are less rounded. So you can adjust this for having a bigger size. I'm gonna leave it at 100. I'm gonna quickly create another UI image inside this one, and here I'm gonna press my Ctrl Shift Alt keys and select the bottom right corner. And once I do that, I can change its position and assign the second sprite, and I'm gonna place it exactly like that. Once I have that, if I move this one, you can see that the other one is moving as well, since it's a child, and we'll see why we are doing that in a moment. But the whole idea is that if the pivot is there, it would follow around wherever the player goes, and that way we'll be able to make really nice UI interactions. I'm gonna quickly scale down this UI a little bit, maybe make it 0.75. I think that looks good, and I think the size also scales well. Once I have that, I'm gonna quickly add a TextMesh Pro object. I'm gonna call this dialogue text, and let me make the color a little bit more visible. Actually, let's just use the colors that were used in Nightstones. So I'm gonna quickly open up a gameplay video and take the color values from that. So it looks like this is the color that we are going for. So if I replace the color, you can see that it looks like this. I'm also gonna change this pixels per unit to around 200 because that resembles the game more. I'm also gonna change the color a little bit, maybe have something like that, and copy that one and paste it for the second object as well. Now if I select the dialog text and make it white, it looks better. Actually, let's just use this color right here, and that suits the theme even more. Once I have that, I'm gonna go to Google Fonts and let's see if we can get a good font for our game. I'm gonna go with Delius and I'll just click on get font and download this one. Once I have that, I'm gonna open up the main folder for this series and create a folder called fonts and drag the font here. Now if you're not familiar with how to create a font asset, you can just right click on this one, go to create and TextMesh Pro font asset, and that gives us this font asset that we can assign to any text in the game. So if I drag this here, alright, so now that it's working, we'll just quickly look at how to make it dynamic. So if I click on the anchor presets, you can stretch to the parent by holding Ctrl Shift Alt and click on the bottom right icon here. And once you do that, you can reduce it by pressing Alt. Now a text size of this much would be similar to what the game has, so you are free to use any kind of text preset. So I think this looks good enough for now. I'm gonna bring the pivot to around exactly where the font is, and I'm gonna call this dialog box. I'm gonna call this tail or something like that. Alright, so now that we have this, we can go ahead and script the working of how it follows the player. So I'm gonna quickly open the Playmaker window and add a quick FSM. I'm gonna call this follow. I think we'll use only one state for this FSM. The purpose of this is to follow the player or the NPC around the map. And right away, I'm gonna go to variables and open up the variable type. I'm gonna set this to game object and call this speaker. I'm gonna name the state follow. I'm gonna get the position of the speaker object. Also, don't forget to enable the input so that we can assign the speaker for debugging. So I'm gonna specify game object and assign the speaker here. I'll add a new variable for the vector that we are storing, and I'm gonna call the speaker position, and this will be every frame, and the space will be at world space. So now we need something called world to screen point. World to screen point is basically taking a 3D game object or a 2D game object in the 3D scene and projecting its position onto the camera. So let's say the player is in the middle of the screen, like right now. So you can see that the middle of the canvas is pointed here. So it would take the NPC position here and it would give screen point as here, exactly where the NPC is visible in the 3D view. So that is the working behind the world to screen point action. So I'm gonna quickly assign the main camera, and world position will be speaker position because we want to translate that into the screen point. And I'm gonna create a variable called speaker screen position, and I'm gonna do it every frame. And make sure you don't tick normalize, because that would then give us values between 0 and 1. So once you have that, you can just add a move towards action, and this would basically take the dialog box and it would move towards the target game object or position, but we'll need only position, and we'll need the speaker screen position for this matter. And here I'm gonna quickly assign the player as the speaker and set the max speed to around 500, let's say, and make the finish distance to 0 so that it always follows the player. So now if I hit play, you can see that it always follows the player. Alright, so the UI is moving, but we'll need the UI to move to the player with a given offset to the player or the NPC for that matter. So we'll need to add an offset to the existing screen point position. So I'm gonna add vector 3, and this is going to be the screen position, and I'm gonna add a new variable called offset position. You could always do something like vector 3 add xyz. This would allow you to only create variables for a particular axis. So let's say we only need the offset on the y-axis, then you can use this particular action, but I'm guessing that we'll need the offset position for both x and y, so I'm gonna create this, and I'm gonna enable every frame and also make this offset position as an input, and I'm gonna drag this a little bit towards there, and for this time I'm gonna assign the NPC 2, which is this NPC right here. I'm gonna hit play, and you can see that it's working for the NPC as well. And now if I come down here and increase the offset position, and it's working fine. And now if I assign it to the player, it should do the same offset, and the same goes with the X position as well. So that's done. I'm gonna come out of the play mode and set the offset value that I found to be proper, and we have a dialog box up and running. Now we can go ahead and make the dialog functionalities.